Well, thanks, guys. I want to begin by saying a big thank you to ACU and to the leadership of Summit. I'm so grateful for the opportunity just to share a few things today that I've learned over the past 21 years in church leadership. Eric and Wilson, guys, thank you both for inviting me to be a part of this. I'm really grateful. For those who don't know me, my name is Corey Trevathan, and I serve as the preaching minister for the Riverside Church of Christ here in Coppell, Texas. Our family moved here about 5 years ago, and we absolutely love Coppell, and we love being a part of the Riverside Church. My wife, Alicia, and I, we have three amazing kids. They are 9, 12, and 14, and as you might imagine, there's just never a dull moment in our house. And I love this thing that you all have chosen for Summit this year, this idea of peacemakers. It's something that's been on my heart and my mind a lot in recent months. And I think this calling of Jesus on our lives to be peacemakers, it's something that we really need to think about, especially as we think about loving and leading our churches through times and through seasons of change and transition, and how we stay unified in the midst of those changes. What I want to do today is I just want to suggest there's two reasons a church can be in transition. I think it's important to remember that a church can be in transition for more than one reason. Sometimes a church experiences change and transition because it's trying to be on mission with Jesus and for Jesus in this world. So it's making changes to the way it does things in order to reach more people for Christ, or maybe to help people grow in their discipleship of Jesus. Sometimes a church experiences change and transition for other reasons. Sometimes it's something external. It's something the church didn't choose. Maybe it's a key leader that's left, or there's a leader in the church who's had a moral failure. Sometimes there's a tragedy that has occurred that has changed things in and for the church. Or sometimes there's a global pandemic and everything changes. So a church can experience change and transition because it's on mission, because it has decided to experience change and transition. But the church can also experience change and transition not by its own choosing, but because something has happened that put the church in a state of change and transition. Either way, I believe we have to learn how to love and how to lead a church when it's going through a difficult season. And here's what I believe is true, that any church doing the hard work of being the church will always be in transition. Any church doing the hard work of being the church will always be in transition. And here's what I mean by that. So often what we want for our churches is peace. And those in leadership will likely do just about anything we can to keep the peace, so to speak. And we're often paralyzed by the fear of what if. And so we choose to take the path of least resistance so we can keep our people happy. We're concerned about unity. We're worried about people leaving. So our focus shifts from our mission and our purpose as a church to what will keep people happy and what will keep people here. So the question is, how do we love and how do we lead a church in transition? And how do we stay unified when we're going through change? I want to share just 3 things that I've learned over the years. And I'll be honest, I didn't come up with these. They didn't originate with me. I learned them from other people, and I'm happy to pass them along to people who are finding themselves loving and leading and serving in churches who are going through significant transition. The first is this: I believe we have to be committed to the long, hard work of real peacemaking. So what happens for a lot of people is that so much is changing so fast in the world around us that the church is the one place people feel like they can come and feel safe, feel comfortable. And as long as everything stays the same, they can feel a sense of stability. And then when the church decides to make a change, and it can be anything from changing the songs we sing in worship to changing a youth event that we used to do, but now we need to do something different, to changing a staff member, or changing something that maybe it's been a long-held tradition of the church or a doctrine of the church. When that happens, no matter what it is, it can really send people spinning. But here's the thing: Jesus didn't call us to be peacekeepers. He called us to be peacemakers. He didn't call us to keep the status quo. He called us to be people who work for peace. And I know many of you know this, but this biblical idea of peace, shalom, it means so much more than just the absence of conflict. It's about more than a ceasefire. It's this idea of universal flourishing, of things being the way they're supposed to be. So if we're going to be a church that's about the business of peacemaking, of setting things right and making things the way they ought to be, we're always going to be on mission, adapting things, changing things, doing whatever we need to do in our church and in our community and in the world around us to work for peace, to participate in making things the way they ought to be, to participate in making things on earth as they are in heaven. So that, by definition, that means we're working for change. Working for peace means working for change. It means that we stay committed to the long, hard work of real peacemaking. The second is this, to stay calm, stay connected, and stay on course. So when I came to Riverside 5 years ago, I arrived in October. In November, we announced that we were going to begin a year-long study on the role of women in worship. And what we meant by that was a process of spiritual discernment, discerning if we believe women could use their spiritual gifts in our worship on Sundays. You can imagine, I'd been here all of a month, and we were diving into this discussion. And of course, I had literally had zero credibility in the bank with our church at that point. I'd only been here for a month. It was something that I believed in. And to be honest, it was a motivating factor for me in deciding to come to Riverside. I had talked this over with our shepherds, and I knew where their hearts were. I didn't know what would happen, but I knew where their hearts were. At that time, Riverside was already in a state of transition. They had just hired a new worship minister a month before they hired me to be their new preaching minister. And so they had completely changed the two main faces and personalities that were present in worship week in and week out. And now we're putting this issue before the church that really, no matter what was decided, just putting this on the table to talk about would put the church into a whole nother level of transition. So regardless of what you might think about that particular issue, you can understand how that announcement on that Sunday took a church that was already in a state of transition, and it just raised the overall anxiety within the church to a whole new level. And we could probably spend all of our time debriefing what that one experience was like. But what I appreciated about our leadership at that time, our group of ministers and elders, is that we really were completely unified. Our leadership felt prompted and motivated and led by the Holy Spirit to lead the conversation, the church into that conversation at that time. And it was a turbulent few months. And like I said, I'd only been here for a minute. So I knew my greatest contribution would initially be behind the scenes. Towards the end, of the process, I took a little more of an upfront role, but by and large, our elders led the way and entered into many hard conversations with members who might be concerned or worried or even upset or angry. What I appreciated was their desire to love every person in our church and talk with everyone. Even if someone decided to leave, they didn't want it to be because that person wasn't heard or loved. And I do want to say that we didn't do everything perfectly. We made mistakes along the way. And if we could do it over again, I think there would certainly be things that we would change. But that's also part of leadership. It's knowing you're not going to get it all right. It's going to be messy. But you're committed to steward your leadership, the leadership that God has put before you, the leadership of the people God has put before you, and of the moment that God has put before you. As the preaching minister, as a leader during that time, I learned that my greatest contribution to our church, the greatest gift that I could give to our church and to our staff and to our elders, it wasn't to preach home run sermons every week. It wasn't to be the guy with all the answers. Really, the greatest gift that I could give our church, to my fellow staff members and to our elders, was to provide a non-anxious leadership presence for them to the best of my ability. Even when things happened that upset me, whenever I wanted to react, the best thing I could do for everyone was just to be a steady, non-anxious presence. And it's the hardest thing for any leader in any organization, but especially in the church. When you're in the middle of transition, when you're experiencing significant change, but the best thing that you can do is just to stay calm. And not just stay calm, but stay connected to your elders, to your fellow staff members, and to your church, and to stay connected to those who agree with you and those who disagree with you. And whenever you do that, then what you're communicating to that person is that our relationship, it isn't based on who's right and who's wrong. It's based on the love that we share in Jesus, that the love that we have in Jesus, it's greater than anything that might come between us or separate us. It's easy enough to stay connected with those who agree with you, but the real work of leadership is staying connected with those who, for whatever reason, disagree with you and loving them the way that Christ loves them. And then to stay on course. And this is difficult too, because you'll be tempted. When enough people get upset or complain, when people start leaving to go other places or threatening to leave, you'll be tempted to reverse course. Now, I'll never forget that last Sunday, we had one last lunch meeting in our gym. Each month, our elders had invited different classes to join them for lunch, where they sat at tables to eat together and to answer questions, to talk together, to hear concerns. On that last Sunday, people who had not had an opportunity to come to a lunch were invited to attend. And at certain tables, the conversation, it became really difficult. And I remember sitting there and thinking, man, this is so hard. There's no way we'll change anything after this. But after that meeting, our ministers and elders met together, prayed together, and then one by one, our elders expressed their desire, compelled by the Holy Spirit, to move forward with a decision that allowed our women to participate more fully in worship using their spiritual gifts. And I was so proud to be in the room in that moment and to see their courage to do what they believed was the right thing, even though they knew it was going to be difficult. Our leadership stayed calm, they stayed connected, and they stayed on course. And I couldn't have been more blessed or more proud that day to be in the room in that moment. The third thing is simply this: to remember the why. Another thing that we faced when I first arrived at Riverside, there was this constant feedback that we were getting that we had changed worship. I kept hearing it come up in different conversations from different people. But to be honest, I had no idea what it meant. Again, I was brand new on the scene, and I was deeply involved in worship planning every week with our worship minister, and I had certain thoughts and ideas about the flow of worship, the purpose of our worship, and what we were trying to accomplish in our time together when we gathered for worship. What I didn't understand was where this criticism was coming from about all the changes that we were making in worship. Finally, after multiple, and we didn't have any context for what worship was like before in this place. Enough people had raised questions about all the changes in worship that our elders asked us to take some time in our next leadership meeting to talk about what worship was like, to talk about our approach to worship, to talk about what we were doing and why we were doing those things. And again, I was really grateful for their openness to listen, to ask questions, and understand where we were coming from before they mandated any kind of change. So we took that time to explain every choice, every decision, the placement of every song, and the reason behind why we did this and why we didn't do that. And I'll never forget, at the end of that meeting, they applauded. And then they asked us to share those same thoughts, those same things with our whole church. All we did in that short presentation was to go back to our why. Why are we gathering for worship? Why are we here? If it's to help people have an encounter with Jesus, if it's to help people experience a growing relationship with Jesus, then that should influence and impact everything we do, every choice we make. What happens so often is that we forget what our mission is, and so we forget why we're here. And when we forget the why, it makes change almost impossible, because now Now we're married to our model. We're married to our programs. We're married to the way things are. We're married to the way things used to be. And we've got these emotional attachments that we've created to those things, so that the very idea of changing them, it seems catastrophic. Todd Bolsinger once wrote, "People don't grieve change, they grieve loss." And one thing I've observed, I think everywhere I've been, is that more often than not, people know instinctively that in order to complete our mission, Ed Stetzer's, he's often quoted as saying, God's church doesn't have a mission, God's mission has a church. God's church doesn't have a mission, God's mission has a church. And I think he's right. Jesus was clear. Our mission is to go and make disciples. Our mission is to seek and save the lost. Our mission is crystal clear. And as long as we can keep the mission front and center, we help people remember that what matters most, it isn't what we do or even how we do what we do. Those things will change over time. Those things are always going to be changing. What doesn't change is why. And you can see this right now as we're all dealing with the pandemic. We've had to shift from meeting in person to meeting online. It's forced us to change and do things differently. And it's forced us to really think about this question: what matters most? What matters most? What's really important, and why is that important? And by the way, we're talking about staying unified during times of change. And I think the question is, unified around what? What matters most? The people often mistake unity for uniformity. The truth is, we're never all going to agree on everything. We're just not. If that were the prerequisite for us to be able to worship together, we would have a church of one. To be unified means that we all gather at the cross, and that what is most important, what we all agree on, is that God so loved the world that he gave his one and only son for us. And we can disagree on other things and still love each other. We can disagree on other things and still worship together. The most important thing, what matters most, is Jesus. And Jesus is our why. Jesus is the reason we gather. Jesus is the reason we worship. He's the reason we live. And any church doing the hard work of being the church, it's always going to be in transition. The question for us is, will we stay unified? Will we allow the love of Jesus to hold us together even when other forces would want to tear us apart? And I know you guys feel this too, but it's my prayer. It's my prayer that we would allow the love of Jesus to be what we're known for. Because at the end of the day, we want the world around us to know us for the way we love God, the way we love each other, and the way we love our neighbor. It's my prayer that it's this kind of love, the love of God displayed through Jesus on the cross, revealed right there, that would be the love that would hold us together. And because of that love, nothing could separate us, that we remember that the love that holds us together is greater than anything that could come between us. So I think those are some of the thoughts, some of the things that I've learned through the years, especially about loving and leading and serving a church in transition. And guys, I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, Corey, thank you so much for really giving us a good kind of foundation to talk on, a good palette of conversation that we can take in a few different directions. And like we had said earlier, each of these pathways and each of these tracks on this particular congregational pathway are really trying to look at this idea of blessed are the peacemakers from the angle of congregational leadership. And as you identified, one of the central parts, one of the normal rhythms of congregational leadership is navigating transition, that there is something about the life of a church that's always in transition. And there's two things that you said early that I think are just important things for us to internalize and kind of get our minds around and get our hearts around. And that is that transitions are very, very normal, but transition is also very, very hard. You use the phrase long, hard work of transition. And I guess kind of what I would like to start the conversation with is Why do you think that can sometimes be a difficult thing to accept as a church leader? Like, we know it in our heads, but letting that truth and that reality sink down into our hearts. This is normal, and it's going to be long, hard work. Why do you think we struggle with that?
We struggle with it because it's relational. Leadership is always relational. And so what happens is, and I've experienced this, you guys have experienced this, we really get preoccupied and concerned with the people inside the four walls, people that we know and love, people we've raised our kids with, people we care about deeply. And so even though we realize maybe we need to make a change, the path of least resistance is always so appealing, because we want to keep the people that we know and love happy, and we want to keep them here. And the thought of them leaving, it just really breaks our heart. We understand intellectually the mission is to seek and save the lost. We understand, in our head what we need to be about. But it's so hard to love the people outside our four walls that maybe we don't know as well, and to keep them front and center in terms of our mission and purpose, because it always comes back to relationship. And will we be willing to put those relationships on the line in order to accomplish our mission? That's just a hard question. It's a hard reality to wrestle with, but it's really where the rubber meets the road for so many of us.
That's great. Corey, you talked about your experience at Riverside and one of the significant transitions that y'all went through. Yeah. And one of the things you brought up, and I think there's probably some elders watching this, and you talked about the way your elders stayed calm, stayed connected, and stayed on course during that transition time. And you gave us a couple windows onto some practical things they did to do those three principles, to practice those three principles. If you were going to advise an eldership on things that they could do to stay calm, stay connected, and stay on course in a time of transition that you saw modeled, or things you think, well, I wish we would have maybe considered this as well, what would be a list of those things?
I really grew immediately in my respect for our shepherds here, and they're not perfect, and they would be the first to tell you they made mistakes along the way, and there's things they would do differently. But what I saw that I appreciated so much was that they didn't back away from anyone who wanted to talk. It didn't matter how upset or angry they were. They didn't back away from going over and sitting in a living room with a small group, even though they knew there might be some people in there that were upset. They didn't back away from conversations in the aisles after church was over, and talking, having long conversations with people who had lots of questions. They invited those people to come and be with them and talk with them, invited them into conversation. I think so many times our tendency in leadership is to kind of pull back from people that disagree with us and lean really hard into those people that do agree with us. And so we kind of create an echo chamber of, well, these people all think like I think. But they really did, I thought, a great job of leaning into hard conversations and loving people and staying calm. And I'll tell you, when I was around some of those conversations, it was hard for me to stay calm because I was internally, just feeling a lot of anxiety. But they did such a great job of just being a calm, steady, loving presence, letting people know they were heard, they were loved. And for some people, that made all the difference in the world. And I just appreciated that so much. So I don't have a long list of do's and don'ts. I would just say, just do what shepherds do. Love your people, love them, and lean in and draw close. Even when you would rather not, go ahead and lean in and let them know that they're heard and that they're loved. And sometimes that doesn't mean giving all the defenses or giving all the reasons. It just means loving and listening and being present. And that mystery of presence goes a long way for a lot of people.
Let me ask one follow-up question on that, Corey. Thanks for that. As you were in the position of minister or staff leader during that time, I suspect that the congregational anxiety during that time of transition placed some degree of pressure on the staff members and the staff relationships with one another. what did you do to manage that, and what would you advise ministers who are trying to lead a staff in that time of transition as it relates to the kind of the external pressure? I mean, it's internal in terms of the church, but external to the staff that they're feeling from the church body. How do they manage that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few things to keep in mind there. First of all, we wanted to have an open door policy, and our staff is highly collaborative, and we wanted to just foster that, whether that was, unplanned, unscheduled meetings. Hey, come in here, let's talk, let's work through this. How are you feeling? Where's your anxiety? What's going on with the people in your circles? To things like just even in our weekly staff meetings, incorporating sort of a book study on leading a church through change and talking through ideas that maybe we wouldn't talk about otherwise, and think about principles that we wouldn't be thinking about had we not had something to reflect on together, and then parsing those ideas and principles out in our own real-time context and situation. Those kind of things were just helpful. There was a lot of stress and anxiety in the office at the time, obviously, because we were all feeling it. We all had a desire to do, the right thing. We also deeply loved people who were hurting and people who were struggling. But I think just keeping that smaller group together of staff, of us loving each other well, checking on each other, that was really, really an important part of that season for us. Yeah.
And I think one of the things that is helpful about what you said and talking about transition is the kind of person that you are in those seasons of change and transition. And the goal and the hoped for destination, to use your phrase, is this non-anxious presence. But what I have found is different people can get to that place different ways. We each have our own ways that we try to cultivate a non-anxious presence because we're all different people and we take different pathways there. So I would love to hear a little bit about how you personally cultivate that. Maybe it's maybe before, during, and after that difficult meeting, or maybe it's practices and habits. I would just like to know a little bit about how you personally cultivate that in your leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things, and you guys know this, if you're not doing that personal inner life work before you get to those seasons of change and transition, it can really put you in a bad spot. So our friend Randy Harris always says, you're always preparing for you know not what. And so I think being diligent in working through spiritual practices and disciplines, it's really vital. I mean, for a multitude of reasons, but this is one of them, that we're always preparing for we know not what. And so, yeah, for me, everybody, like you said, has a different path, different things work, different people. For me, I really am drawn to things like journaling and time in solitude and prayer. And so I enjoy those times really early in the morning. I also enjoy running. And so I get up before everybody else in my house gets up, and I get to go out and spend time with the Lord on the trail. And that really works out a lot of anxiety and nerves in my own life, just physically and mentally. It's a blessing. But then even in those situations, like in real time, when you're having those difficult conversations, one of the most helpful things for me has just been the practice of breath prayers. And I've got several that I kind of lean into at different moments and different occasions. And just having those to pray over and over again, just internally, when you're in real time in that difficult moment, that's become a very helpful way for me to just be centered and to be non-anxious and to be still in the middle of that storm, whatever it is. And that's been another helpful practice for me as well. So all of those things are so critical, because if you're not centered, if you're not experiencing a deep and rooted life in relationship with the Lord, and then you get to these troubled waters, it's really difficult to have that anchor, to have that tether. And so those are some of the things that have helped me, at least.
Helpful. You had also mentioned this early, and it was kind of kind of a sub point, but I wanted to let you explore it a bit more. We've talked about how we manage ourselves through transition, good leadership principles. And you also, though, noted that this has been a topic that's been on your heart recently. And I don't know, my Facebook stalking may be wrong here, but I'm pretty sure you've been preaching through a series on peacemaking. And so I think that's an important part of this conversation, which is there's also that role of the pulpit that can be a place where we help form churches into peacemaking bodies. And so I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that, kind of the origin of that series, some of the things that you've done, and kind of how people have responded to that by you talking about this particular topic so head on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so probably like a lot of us, as 2020 unfolded, my preaching calendar went out the window pretty quickly as things started changing so rapidly. But one of the series that I had planned for this year was the series on peacemakers. But originally, I didn't really know what I was going to do with it. I had this idea that had formed, but it hadn't quite crystallized yet. And then the pandemic hit, and then all the headlines sort of rolled in. It felt like every day or every week of racial injustice. And I started leaning into those words of Jesus in Matthew 5:9. And it just really crystallized in my heart and my mind this idea of blessed are the peacemakers, not the peacekeepers. And for me, that was a distinction. Because Jesus himself, you think you could go to the life of Jesus, to the teaching of Jesus, and begin to understand what did he mean when he said that. And, we think about Jesus as a person of peace, and he was. But Jesus wasn't a peacekeeper, at least not in the way we think about it. He was a peacemaker. For the people of his day and time, he often disrupted the peace. He repeatedly called out the Pharisees. He goes into the temple with a whip and cords and drives out the money changers. He spent time with tax collectors and sinners. Jesus was constantly disrupting the peace to the point that it got him crucified, right? Now we understand that was also for him a practice of peacemaking. But the life and the teaching of Jesus shows us over and over again that to be a peacemaker, it's an active role, not a passive role. It requires action, not inaction. And so with all that was going on in our world, I decided to take that series and spend some time talking about the ideas of racial injustice, what was happening in our world, and what does it mean for us to be peacemakers. In that series for us, it wasn't so much a series of sermons. I preached 2 sermons, the beginning and the ending. But the 5 middle messages were conversations with different people in different places around the country, different skin color, different backgrounds. And we just leaned into the tension, leaned into hard conversations and asked that question, what does Jesus mean when he says, blessed are the peacemakers, and how can we participate in that? And I'll be honest, it was challenging. It was challenging for me personally. I think it was challenging for our church, as you might expect. Some people really loved it and gravitated towards it. Some people, it made them very uncomfortable. And some people, that discomfort was so much that they needed to go somewhere else. And that was a hard thing to talk about as well. Again, I appreciated our shepherds that throughout the whole process, they were 1,000%, behind me, behind us, behind this idea, and really our understanding of, what was Jesus talking about? And how are we called to live in this world as peacemakers? I think so many times, I know it's true for me, we've read through that list of Beatitudes and we blow right by, blessed are the peacemakers. But there is so much power right there in what Jesus, I believe, had in mind in that calling of some of those first disciples, in Galilee to be peacemakers, to participate in making things on earth as they are in heaven. And that is a challenging calling on our lives. And it's something that really convicted me, convicted us, and something we're still leaning into. And I think we will be for quite some time as we process out what that means for us.
Corey, I've noticed a couple times how you've talked about the elders and their support for you, whether it's in these difficult conversations or these transitional conversations. And you've also expressed your affection and respect for them multiple times. And so, I'm just struck by how important that must be, that relationship, that mutual relationship for a church in its time of transition. And to your point, churches are always going to be in transition. What have you done, and what have your elders done to foster that bond between the two of you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I wish I could tell you, like, here's 5 steps to having a fantastic relationship with your ministers and elders, and somebody somewhere probably has that list. For us, there's just some principles that have just been longstanding, and they were here before I got here. So I don't want to take any credit for this. I don't know when the DNA was established for this group of elders and where this came from for them, other than just their love for each other and their love for God. But they decided early on that there wasn't going to be any separation, that together we're a leadership team. So in my 5 years of being on staff here, I can count on one hand the number of times our elders have met without me or without our staff. We always talk and pray and process things together. And I really appreciate and value that. They've committed to us, and they've practiced it over and over again, that they've got our back 1,000%. And we do our best, because I believe it's important to never surprise your elders. And so we do our best to always make sure we're communicating very well with them, and we're all together in the same loop. Every single week I send them an email, and it's different every week, but it's, hey, I know you hear a lot of negative things. Let me tell you some of the stories and the good things, some of the wins that are happening that you may not hear about, that you can share with others. So we're always talking about not just the negativity, but here's the good things that God is doing right here in our midst. Let's make sure we celebrate these and remember this. That's a very important part of it. But what happens is, even when you do that, even when someone comes to them with a question and they don't know what's going on, because we've developed such a high degree of trust with each other, they still have our back. And I've experienced that, and I've appreciated that, because then we can talk about it later and we can catch back up and see what was missed. But we've done such a good job of laying this groundwork of collaboration and communication and being in touch and giving each other the benefit of the doubt, to not snap to a negative, thought or decision about what might have happened, but just to go figure out what actually was happening in this moment. It has really blessed us, and not just me, but our entire staff, and I think our elders as well. And they model that. And if somebody really does have a problem, with a staff member, that elder is pretty quick to say, have you talked to them? You need to not just come to me, but you need to go talk to them, and we need to work this out and see what's really going on. So I think some of those things have really been a blessing for us. I feel like, and I can text or call any of them anytime, any day. A lot of our guys travel for work, living here near DFW. A lot of these guys are on the road, on the plane. They're going different places, but they're always reachable, and they're always, where we can contact them. And I just love that about those guys, and the relationship that really they fostered, that we all benefit from.
And I think that as we're kind of wrapping up, that's a good concluding reminder that when it comes to being peacemakers and being unified as a church, that starts with our leadership. And the more we as a leadership, whether that's a ministry team, whether that's ministers and elders, the more unity and peace that exists there, that is an opportunity to really model something for the rest of our congregation. And so I think that's a really good reminder as we think about congregational leadership. We are thinking about what that looks like to lead congregations, but it starts with our leadership teams and the people that we work with most closely, whether we have a team of 2 or a team of 20.
Probably more that we could come up with, but the 2 or 3 that come to mind pretty quickly: Canoeing the Mountains by Todd Bolsinger, fantastic book and resource that I benefited from. Failure of Nerve by Ed Friedman, another resource. And then Gary Newhoff came up with a book. I forget the exact title, but it's about leading a church through change. That's the one that, as a staff, was really helpful and practical that we went through together during some of those early transitions we faced. And it was just a very, very easy read, but very helpful book full of principles and things for us to talk about. So those are some of the ones that come quickly to mind that have been helpful to me. Absolutely.
That's perfect. Again, we want to say thank you for your time and your reflections and conversation. This has been really, really helpful. And hopefully it's been helpful to those of you who have tuned in and are watching this. Whenever you're watching it, we want to encourage you to go to acusummit.org to not just find out more about our congregational leadership pathway, but to find out more about all of the different offerings that Summit is providing this year in our virtual Summit 2020 online. But we want to say a big thank you to Corey, thank you, Eric, and thank you for listening in on this particular pathway. And we hope you have a great rest of the day.